Street Fighter V is a 2D 6-button fighting game that was co-developed by Capcom and Dimps. It was published by Capcom. Street Fighter V was released in February of 2016 to the PlayStation 4 and Windows through Steam, with a Linux release coming later. As of this review, the latest update of the game is version 1.07. Street Fighter V retains much of the same gameplay from its predecessors and changes some things up through the V-gauge system. You now have a V-gauge, which builds when you receive attacks, and adds a V-skill, V-trigger, and V-reversal. The V-reversal is universal to all characters and allows you to break enemy combos. The V-skill and V-trigger are moves and special properties that are unique for each character. For instance, Ryu's V-skill is a parry, and when his V-gauge fills, he can activate his V-trigger, which imbues his special attacks with a lightning property that more quickly fills the enemy's stun meter. Street Fighter V launched with 16 characters, but currently has 20, with the 21st character, Urien, to be added later this year. DLC characters, costumes, and stages can be purchased with in-game fight money that you receive from completing survival mode, winning ranked mode, doing story mode, or other such challenges. If you don't have enough fight money for a DLC item you want, there is of course a cash shop that allows you to use real-world money to purchase the DLC through the PlayStation Store or Steam Store. Street Fighter V also allows cross-platform play, so people on the PS4 version and the PC version, and eventually the Linux version of the game can all play together, consolidating the player base. The two games are identical, except the PC version can change or lower the graphics settings, but more on that in a bit. Now all of this sounds fine and dandy, but is the game itself any good? Let's find out with The Good. At its core, Street Fighter V is a fantastic game, mostly because of the gameplay. The gameplay itself is beautiful. It's not so focused on tech skill like Ultra Street Fighter 4 was. It's more focused on the fundamentals of Street Fighter and basically fighting games as a whole. Spacing and footsies and punishing whiffs and whatnot. Now, many top players and casual players alike have criticized this as they prefer tech skill, but personally I think the game reaches a nice blend of fundamental focus and tech skill focused gameplay, leaning a little heavier on the fundamental side. So don't get me wrong, there is tech skill to be had in this game, it's just not as rigid as it was in Street Fighter 4 or other fighting games. Another great thing is that each character feels unique. They feel different from each other, but they also feel different from their previous iterations. Characters like Ken, who started as a clone of Ryu basically, now are so vastly different in playstyle that a good Ryu player isn't necessarily a good Ken player, and vice versa. The art style for Street Fighter V is fantastic. I like it much more than the art style for Street Fighter 4. The graphics themselves are serviceable, and obviously look a bit nicer on the PC end of things, but on the PS4 it looks fine. The music in the game and the overall presentation is fantastic. Some of these classic tracks for character themes like Chun-Li's theme are the best they've ever sounded in Street Fighter V. Having your fight backed by these beautiful and just really great to listen to tracks is always a treat. The fight money system in Street Fighter V is also a very nice option for those who rather grind out their time rather than pay real world money for what they want. Personally, I haven't spent a dime on the game besides paying for the game itself, and I have most of the stages and all of the characters just from fight money. But even though the general gameplay is really good, it doesn't carry the entire game. So now it's time for the bad. Previously I had mentioned that the PC version of the game can turn up or down the graphical settings. And while this is true, you actually are going to want to turn a lot of them down rather than up. I had the game on PS4 originally, and the PS4 is equivalent to the medium settings on PC. And then I bought the PC version. I turn up all the graphic settings because I figure, hey, my rig can handle it, it'll look nicer. Turns out, no. While the textures and shadows turned up is a great idea, turning up the anti-aliasing and the post-processing effects is a terrible idea. It adds terrible motion blur and an awful screen shake when you do attacks. But the worst is the anti-aliasing, which is just a disgusting blur all over the screen. It looks like the game's made of clay. Now to demonstrate this, I'm going to show a couple clips of the PC and PS4 version, with the PC version having both the low and high anti-aliasing settings enabled, so you can see the difference between the two. Street Fighter V, ever since the beginning, has been a game mired with a rocky server launch and terrible glitches. When the game came out, you couldn't even play online, and when you could, the netcode was awful, stuttery. You'd be going through relay servers, and the rollback netcode just didn't really work well. Not to mention, there was an abundance of rage quitters, and there's no penalty for the rage quitters. It's questionable even if there's a penalty now, months down the line, if Capcom's even implemented anything. Personally, I didn't ever really encounter that many rage quitters, but I've heard horror stories of people online who have encountered many and many, keep encountering them because Capcom has no way of punishing them. Capcom has done a terrible job communicating with the community. They've done a terrible job communicating with each other. For instance, there is 8 frames of delay from when you press a button to when the action comes up on screen in Street Fighter V, which is 2 more than Ultra Street Fighter 4. So many players figured that this was unintentional, that this is too high, so they reported it to Capcom as a bug. Capcom Japan told players that it was intentional, while Capcom US told players that they're looking into a fix, and that a fix will be coming after the Capcom Pro Tour this year. It seems that they're having a terrible job communicating with each other because they got completely different answers there. The game itself had 5 beta tests, and still when it launched, and even today, things are messed up. There's a good abundance of glitches and bugs. They can't even get their cash shop right. I tried to buy Jury on Steam just to see what it was like to go through the purchase of buying a character, and it wouldn't let me, so I had to purchase her with fight money. They can't even get the Steam cash shop right. Originally, they were going to have their own cash shop where you used Zenny, so they wouldn't have to pay any money to Sony or Valve for using Steam or PlayStation Network. But they couldn't get that right, so they scrapped it. And now they can't even use the stores they defaulted back on. Many casual players also complained that there was a lack of content on the game's release. Things that Capcom have added in to try and fill this content void that many casual players felt the game had hasn't really worked. The story mode that they released is a good effort, I guess, but it falls flat, especially in comparison to Injustice or Mortal Kombat story modes. My main problem with the story mode is you switch between characters willy-nilly, and it's very disorienting. It's pretty evident that this game was released for pro players and competitive players in time for the Capcom Pro Tour season. This shouldn't have happened mainly because the game was not ready for release, and Capcom was not ready to handle the server load. Many pro players feel as if Ultra Street Fighter 4 didn't get its time in the sun anyway, so there's no need to release this game. Capcom rushed this game out for a player base that didn't even want it on both ends of the spectrum. On top of that, the game has terribly unsecure servers. I've encountered hackers and cheaters, people that have been using characters that aren't released yet through DLC files that they just mod in. I've personally been able to use various exploits for extra fight money on both the console version of things and the PC side of things, and Capcom has no answer for any of this. Overall, it's just been a really poor show from Capcom. And it's really sad too, because at its core, Street Fighter V is a fantastic game. But in the end, it was a game that was rushed out to release too early, and that definitely shows. I'd recommend Street Fighter V if you really enjoy fighting games, or if you can find it for cheap. Personally, I love the game, but because of all of its bugs, glitches, and just overall incompetence by Capcom, it's a tough game to recommend to people. Street Fighter V gets Balrog's eyes from the Street Fighter II anime movie out of 10.